Today, we're joined by Trudy Eckstine and Amy Reed, Senior Quality Analysts with the AASHTO Accreditation Program. We're also joined by Brian Johnson, the AASHTO Accreditation Program Manager, and Brian will be helping me sift through some of your questions and maybe answering some of them for you as well. But for now, I'll hand it over to Trudy and Amy. Thank you so much for being here, and take it away, ladies.
Good afternoon, and thank you for attending our webinar. I'm Trudy Eckstine, and I'll be going over the first part of the webinar. Amy Reed will be handling the second part. Technician certification requirements is a topic we get a lot of questions about, and we'll be taking questions at the end of this presentation, and hopefully we'll be able to answer some of your questions. We have two learning objectives today. The first one is we want to make sure you're able to interpret personnel requirements in ASTM Quality Management System Standards C1077, C1093, D3666, D3740, and E329, and including the use of external certification programs. And the second learning objective is we want to make sure that you understand how internal certification exams are evaluated by the AASHTO Accreditation Program. We're going to go over the importance of technician certifications in this section. But first, we're going to talk about the materials covered. So what material types are covered by each ASTM quality management system? When we talk about D3666, we're going to talk about aggregate, asphalt binder, emulsified asphalt, asphalt mixture. C1222 falls under the cement scope. Now, we're not actually going to be talking about this quality management system standard today because as of right now, there are no technician certification requirements to meet C1222. C1077 covers aggregate and concrete scopes. C1093 covers masonry, and we are going to discuss some new things about the masonry C1093 requirements later in the presentation. D3740 is a soil scope, and then we have E329 that includes all those scopes listed, including spray fire resistive material and steel inspection. The chart that you see in front of you is a bar graph chart of the accredited laboratories as of the beginning of November when I ran the numbers for us. As you can see to the left, C1077 is the largest quality management system standard for accredited laboratories that we have for concrete. Okay. If you go more to the middle of the chart, you're going to see D3666, and we're going to talk about asphalt mixture. They have about 704 laboratories accredited for this particular quality management system standard. And then if you go to the far right, you'll see E329 for spray fire resistive material. We have about 175 laboratories accredited for this quality management system standard. There are lots of agencies that require AASHTO accreditation. And then we also have agencies that require the quality management system standards. And we just have a few examples in front of us. There's many out there, but one of them that I'll mention here is the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA. They require their laboratories to have D3666 asphalt mixtures accreditation. And we have about 704 labs accredited for that, as well as when they require C1077 concrete. And as you saw in the previous slide, we have over 1,100 laboratories accredited for that quality management system standard. I'll mention New York DOB, which is the New York City Department of Buildings. I am the state quality analyst for New York, so I wanted to mention that. I'm also the quality analyst for Texas and Alaska, so a little bit of throw out to those states. But there are 85 laboratories that are accredited for E329 concrete. And the NYC Department of Buildings actually uses those laboratories. And then to the far right, we have WABO, which is the Washington Association of Building Officials, mainly the Washington, Oregon area. And we have 17 laboratories accredited for the E329 concrete that they require. Here is a typical simplified organizational chart. It might look similar to what you use, or you might have a little more complicated, more detailed one. Organizational charts always need to be current. So you're going to want to always make sure you have that revision date included on your organizational chart. And you need to ensure that all staff is certified. And you want to make sure that the positions accurately capture the roles of individuals. And positions can't be altered. So when I say that, that means you cannot move staff around on your organizational chart to meet the certification requirements because maybe they hold a specific certification that would meet and the other guy doesn't, and you're trying to move people around. We don't allow that, and we don't want positions to be altered for that reason. So based off of this simplified organizational chart, the people that need to hold the certifications would be the supervisors and any of the field and lab technicians, as well as those supervising field and lab technicians. In regards to trainee status, a lot of times laboratories will tell us, oh, he's a trainee, he doesn't need certifications. We can't reclassify technicians as trainees. The AASHTO Accreditation Program does not allow for trainee status. The laboratory must demonstrate conformance to the personnel qualification requirements for all involved personnel. Some general AASHTO Accreditation Program guidelines for certifications. Expired certifications are never accepted. Also, intervals must be followed. Sometimes if the standard specifies a recertification interval, the interval must be followed if it is more stringent than the certification being used. An example of that would be C1077 and NICET, which we'll touch base in a little bit. Okay, so now we're going to talk about determining if a certification meets the requirements, right? That's always a big question. There are many different certification programs out there. There are state programs, regional, national programs, and we have actually identified over 55 programs that have certifications, but also there are probably many more that we're not even aware of at this time. So what's your biggest question, right? How do I sign up for the right certification? How do I know? Well, you're first going to ask yourself what test methods are included in each program. That's something you're going to need to check into. Are written examinations included? Are performance examinations included? What types of questions are included on the written exams and how are they administered? Do the programs have expiration dates? And that's a lot of things to think about, right? To determine which class and which certification program to send your technicians to. Well, we are called AASHTO Resource, so we want to be a resource to you. So we want you to contact your state quality analyst when you have questions. You can email us, you can give us a call, and you can just say, hey, I want to send Joe Bell to this particular certification class. Does this meet C1077 concrete? I'm really not sure, and I'm having a hard time following along. You know what? We'll be happy to help you and guide you in the right direction. Sometimes we know off the top of our head because we're used to that particular certification program. And other times we may check into an in-house certification table that we have. And this certification table we reference all the time, including assessors, whether or not a specific certification program meets the requirements, if it includes written exams, if there's a recertification going on, and exactly what quality management system standards it meets. So when we talk about third-party certifications, we're talking about those external agencies. And there are lots of positives to using an external agency. They're objectively administered. They're usually skillfully prepared exams. They're very easy to confirm. A lot of the certification bodies will have a website that you can go in and you can type in the technician's name and up pops their certification. So it's very easy to confirm. And those websites and certification certificates that they'll mail out, they're updated regularly. However, external certifications have a lot of risk. I shouldn't say a lot, just a few anyway. But one of the biggest things laboratories are facing right now are the availability of the classes due to COVID especially, right? So some certifications are not even open. Some have reduced class sizes. Some are spacing their classes out and they're not having them every month and they're only having them every other month. And that does make it difficult for you to get your technician in to take that certification and get that certification so you meet the quality system standards. So that is the biggest risk, and especially one we're facing right now due to COVID. But those certifications can also be missing critical aspects in the written exams. And also you can also get a passing grade even if you fail a couple or miss a couple of those questions that would make it critical for the test method. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit and we're going to talk about the requirements of the ASTM Quality Management System Standards. And we're going to break it down standard by standard for you, okay? So the first one we're talking about is C1077. And if you remember, the scopes for that are concrete and aggregate. So for C1077, the manager of testing and inspection must be a licensed professional engineer and have 5 years of experience. So if they're a PE, they're already going to have that 5 years experience most likely. Laboratory and field supervisors, they need 3 years experience, relevant to the scope of testing. So that would be concrete or aggregate or maybe both. And here is something to pay attention to. The PE license cannot be used in place of a certification. So if you're a small laboratory, you may have that PE doing testing as well, or he may be a supervisor in addition to being the manager, and he has his PE license. But if he's doing testing or he's supervising and reviewing test reports, he needs to have the certification needed. C1077 does allow for internal and external certifications. C1077 does require performance examinations. That's the physical demonstration of the test methods. That would be where the technician is running through the test method and the supervisor is watching them demonstrate that test step by step. It also includes a written examination, and the written examination needs to include all those bullet points there: the significance in use, sampling, specimen preparation, procedure, calculations, reporting of results. The written exam must include all those items. For C1077, personnel performing the test and their supervisor must be certified for all the relevant testing. The certification must be reviewed at least every 5 years, and an expiration date must be on the certificate. C1077 does require specific test methods to be covered. So if we were talking about aggregate, those specific test methods would be C117, C127, C128, C136. If we're switching and talking about concrete and field, those are the test methods that would be required to be on that external written and performance exam, or even internal. Concrete lab, you have C39, C617, or C1231. And C78, you see that little asterisk there. The laboratory certification must cover C78 if the laboratory is accredited for it. If you're not accredited for it, you're not going to seek it. You don't have to have that certification for C78. The biggest thing here, I think, is the green box here, that the certification must be renewed at least every 5 years. And we'll talk about it here a little bit with NICET. Like I just said, the written exams need to be taken every 5 years. Now, NICET's a great program, and they do work for meeting these requirements for C1077 if you're initially taking the written exam. But when you're doing a renewal for NICET, they will send you documents and you'll send them back and some money, but they won't make you take that written exam again. So you may already have that certification and they'll renew you, but they don't make you take that written exam. And that's a requirement for C1077. So you could meet originally for C1077, but you may not be able to meet on that renewal since they don't make you take that written exam. You would have to take that written exam in order to meet and use this certification. Now, C1093 is the only other quality management system standard that requires a written exam every 5 years. So in that case, C1077 and C93 have the same requirements. But all the other quality management systems do not require an interval, so you wouldn't have to worry about that. It just needs to be a current certification. For D3666, And if you remember from the beginning, that was aggregate, asphalt binder, emulsified asphalt, asphalt mixture. The manager of testing needs to have 5 years experience, be a licensed PE, or approved by the Administrative Task Group. And what the Administrative Task Group is our oversight review board. And what they would do is they would review that biographical sketch for the manager and see if that person has equivalent education and experience to that of a PE. And if that is the case, they would get approval that way and they could meet D3666. Field and plant supervisors need to have 3 years experience relative to their scope of testing. And here's the big one for D3666. So pay attention. This is the quality management system standard that requires certifications to be external. You cannot do internal certifications for D3666. That's one major thing to remember. And we did mention the certification must be for the scope of testing. And that certification must cover at least one test method in that scope. But to be eligible for D3666, you must be accredited for at least 3 test methods in the scope. But the certification, you'd only have to have 1 test method in that certification program. D3740, we're switching gears to soil now. So all you soil people, listen up. The manager needs to have 5 years experience. They need to be a licensed PE, or here's something different. They can also be a professional geologist, or they can also be approved by our Administrative Task Group chair. Field and lab supervisors, like the other ones, 3 years experience, relative certifications to the scope of their testing. But here's an additional requirement that is not included in the other ones. There's internal performance evaluation requirements. So that's the competency of your supervisors and your technician. That needs to be done every 36 months for supervisors and every 24 months for technicians. D3740 does require written and performance examinations. For the written examinations, at least 5 soil test methods need to be included. Now, if you remember C1077, they gave you a whole list of test methods that needed to be covered. For D3740, they're letting you select those 5 soil test methods. The examination needs to cover the entire test method, as well as significance and use, sampling, specimen prep, procedure, and reporting of results. And then again, there's that performance examination that is required, that actual demonstration of the test method by the technician and the supervisor watching. And D3740 does allow for external and internal. So now we're going to start talking about C1093, and there's been lots of changes with the certification requirements for this particular quality management system standard. And we're going to let Amy Reed start to talk, and she'll help you through the rest of the presentation.
Hi, everyone. Like Trudy mentioned, we're going to start today with C1093. And Trudy, you want to go ahead and bring the first slide up for me? ASTM Quality Management System Standard C1093 is something that the AASHTO Accreditation Program has accredited for many years. But just recently, they made some major updates to their standard. And because of that, we're now doing a more comprehensive certification review. We're going to go over all those changes today. But just keep in mind, may have already happened to a few of you, but if you've had your CCRL inspection since August 1st of this year, or you have one coming up and going forward, these requirements are going to apply to you. So if you already have C1093, or if you're seeking it, make sure you pay attention because there's some major changes to certification requirements. We're going to start with the Manager of Testing and Inspection Services. For C1093 Masonry, they need to be a licensed professional engineer or approved by the Administrative Task Group for their experience, and they need a minimum of 5 years experience. Supervisors are a little bit different for C1093 compared to the other quality management system standards that Trudy went over today, and that's because they actually need 5 years experience performing testing, and within that 5 years, at least 2 years needs to be relevant testing for masonry. In addition to that, similar to C1077, if your professional engineer is a technician or a supervisor, they still have to meet the certification requirements, and their license could not be used in place of the PE license, in place of the certification. For C1093, it's important to note one distinction. They actually specify specific test methods for lab and field, and those methods, it's not based on your current AASHTO accreditation. Instead, it's based on your lab scope of testing, which means the actual testing that you perform. Where that kind of is important in this case is under Masonry Lab, you'll notice standard C270. That isn't a quality management, that isn't a test method or a standard that we accredit for at this point. But if you have a CSRL inspection and you do masonry mortar, you will need to have a certification for all masonry staff that covers C270, even though it's not on your accreditation directory. In addition to that, it's important to remember that your certification has to be renewed at least every 5 years, and the certification has to have an expiration date. Physical performance evaluations are required for C1093, and similar to a lot of the other ones we've gone over today, the certification for technicians or supervisors can be internal or external. You'll see on the right-hand side of the screen the list of sections from the standards that are required by C1093, and it might jump out at you, procedure isn't listed. This kind of was a surprise to us too. And the reasoning is C1093, the writers felt that since it's in combination with the performance evaluation, they wouldn't require procedural questions in the written exam. So you don't technically have to have them, but I always say it's great to have extra just to cover that information for your staff to make sure they know all of the ins and outs of the test method. That's C1093, and I assume we'll have some questions when we get to the end just because the new standard, a lot of you haven't been through a CTRL inspection since the requirements went in place in August. But for now, we'll move on to ASTM Quality Management System Standard E329. For this standard, your manager of testing inspection services needs to have at least 5 years experience and be a licensed PE. We say they have to be a licensed PE, but of course there's a caveat. There's always some, there's always something to confuse it a little. And if your laboratory is a producer or you do no third-party testing, everything's internal, you can have your manager approved by the ATG in place of a professional engineer. Lab and field supervisors for E329, they also must have at least 3 years experience and relevant external certifications to their scope of testing. So E329 does not allow for internal certifications for supervisors. Sometimes this gets a little confusing if a lab has, say, C1077 and their supervisor has an internal written exam that was approved as their certification. They would still need to have that external certification that covers at least one test method in their scope of testing. Moving on to technicians, they can have an internal or external certification just relevant to the scope of testing. What that means is if your lab is seeking E329 for multiple material types, you need to have a certification for every technician and supervisor that covers at least one test method for each material type. And sometimes you can even have an asphalt certification that covers one aggregate and one asphalt test, so that works. It doesn't necessarily have to be called, an aggregate certification or an asphalt certification. It would just be based on the test methods covered under it. And an important reminder for E329 is that it can only be granted in conjunction with the underlying quality management system standards. This means anytime there's another quality management system standard associated with it, you have to meet all the minimum requirements for that first. For instance, if your laboratory is accredited for D3666 asphalt mixture, you have to meet all of those requirements before being eligible for E329 asphalt mixture. We're going to go a little deeper into E329 steel inspection today, and this is just because it's one of the only quality management system standards that actually specifies a specific certification that has to be covered. So E329 steel inspection indicates that supervisors and techs need to have a certification through the American Welding Society, and the only caveat to this, because there's always something in there, there's an exception, and that would be if you're able to get something from your specifier that says another certification is acceptable in place of AWS, then we would also accept that. And just as a reminder, currently the only test method that we accredit for at AASHTO that falls under E329 steel inspection would be F3125 rotational capacity, and currently that's only performed during AASHTO resource assessments. So if you need E329 steel inspection for a project, make sure you reach out to AASHTO resource and request rotational capacity. All right, so we've covered all of the ASTM quality management system standards that we currently accredit for that have certification requirements. Now we're going to go over in-house certifications. Most of the quality management system standards that Trudy and I went over today have the option of an internal exam or an internal certification. If you've pursued this in the past, or if you're thinking about it, you might have heard the term CERT. So what is CERT? CERT stands for the Certification Exam Review Team, and it's a group made up of quality analysts, assessors, and members of our management team. And whenever we're evaluating internal certification programs, we base it on the conformance to the standards. So AASHTO isn't coming up with our own list of requirements and saying, oh, we think you should have all this extra information. We look directly at the quality management system standards that Trudy and I went over today. We look at those written exam requirements, and then that's what we're going to make sure that your laboratory is conforming to. Because if you're going the internal exam route, it's got to be comparable to an external certification program. Just a couple things to keep in mind. Our exams are reviewed weekly, but if we have a lot of internal exams coming in, especially right now when external certifications aren't as available as people are used to, it can sometimes get a little backlogged and take a little longer than you would expect to get your results back. We do charge $100 per test method for the review. What this means is typically when you submit exams, say it's for D3740 soil, you would submit 5 written exams, $100 a piece. If you choose the combined exams, such as the modified and standard proctor, you would still be charged $100 per test method because we still have to evaluate those exams up against the modified and the standard method and make sure that the differences are covered. Once the exams are approved, you don't have to go through the process again every time you have an assessment. Instead, we have a table where we keep the results of all the approved exams, and we will only contact you to make updates if major changes are made to the test method or to the quality management system standards that you were trying to meet with the written exam. Once internal exams are approved, at that point you can administer them to your staff. We don't recommend that you administer them to your staff before they're approved, because there's a good chance you may have to add a few questions and then have them take the exams again anyway. But make sure your exams always include the technician name, evaluator name, date, and also the score. Whenever you're evaluating internal certification programs, I've had a lot of people over the years ask me, well, how many questions do I need? I know a long time ago we actually did say a minimum, and I think it was 7 or 10 or something like that. But over time we've realized that it's better to not put a minimum or maximum requirement on the number of tests because everyone writes tests in a different way. So your question density is much more important than the number of questions that you actually have on your exams. In addition to that, we don't require a specific type of questions. Instead, we leave it up to you. We do see a variety of test questions. We see a lot of multiple choice, true, false, fill in the blank. We just like to see exams that are thought-provoking because as a reminder, you are creating these to be used in place of an external certification. Calculations is a big one. It's required by most of the quality management system standards. And whenever you add calculations to your exams, make sure that it's an actual performance of a calculation for your staff where you're going to input raw data that they're going to have to do a calculation and respond to. Best practice, that's kind of my favorite section, and that's, yes, all the ASTM quality management system standards will say, here's the minimum of what you need to do. Well, I know most of you don't want to do the minimum. You want to make your exams as useful as possible for your staff. That means if there's any extra questions or sections that you feel are important, you want to include those even though they're not necessarily required. And as one more reminder, this is more of a housekeeping issue. All of your exams must include a revision date and publication year. The reason for the revision date is so that We keep that in our table, and then whenever you have your next assessment, the assessor will compare the revision date on the exams you present to them to the revision date we have on file. And if they're the same, your exams will be approved and you won't have to submit anything later to the quality analyst. The publication year is kept on record just to ensure that you're using the most current standards to create your exams. And then if there are any major updates to a standard, we can easily contact you in the future and have you make the update. So the big question is, what happens after exam is submitted? So you had your assessment and you find out, okay, internal exams are the route that we're going to go this time to get everyone certified. The first thing you're going to notice is after you submit your internal exams for review, you're going to receive an invoice. Once the invoice is paid, then your exams will be assigned to a member of our staff to do pre-work. What pre-work is, it means that someone's going to go through every single question on your exam, compare it to this test method that you're creating the exam for, and write down what section that question came from. The reason for that is then we have a meeting with several members of staff, typically groups of 4 to 6, 4 to 8, depending on how many participants we have that week. And we'll go through and compare your exam, the sections where the questions came from, to the ASTM Quality Management System standard to make sure that you're meeting the minimum requirements in it. And then once that's done, I'll compile the results, or one of the other quality analysts that help out will compile your results and send them back to you. Once you get your results, typically the exam doesn't go back to CERT at that point. You just work directly back and forth with a quality analyst that's assigned to your file. And so you'll make the updates, you'll send them to the QA. Ideally, they then look at it and say, yep, you hit the minimum, your exams are good to go, you can administer them to your staff. Once in a while, they may have to send them back to you and you'll have to make more updates. So definitely when you get your first round of information back, take some time and make sure you add the minimum or a little bit extra just to make sure your exams are adequate. This slide here is actually an example of what you might see after the exams are reviewed. This would be emailed to you, and it's just an example of, maybe 1 or 2 exams did meet, a few more might have questions that need to be added. We don't typically say you need to add a question for every line item in the standard. Instead, we'll say, you didn't have anything to cover sampling, or you didn't have anything to cover these major portions of the procedure, something like that. But we try not to be too nitpicky because we understand that we're just trying to get the minimum requirements for the quality management system standards written exams. One final thing I'd like to go over with everyone today is certification policy. All the information Trudy and I have gone over, if you're not doing this every single day, it's a lot of information. It's a lot to remember, probably too much to retain just someone talking to you. As Kim mentioned, the webinar will be posted soon. So you can always listen to the webinar again. Another thing is, Kim actually just attached it in the chat, but we have a policy on our website and it goes over all of the information that Trudy and I talked about today. So if you're like, I think they said something about what happens after I submit my exams, you can look it up here. We've worked really hard the past few years to make as many documents as possible public facing. So if you want to find the certification policy or any other document, if you go to Reed University and Document Library, we have a lot of documents there on our policies that'll be really helpful for you, whether you're a new laboratory or you've been in the program a long time and you just need a little more information. One final thing to go over today is just a recap of our objectives. The first is that we wanted to make sure that we went over the requirements for each ASTM quality management system standard, which Trudy and I split and went over with you today. And then I went over understanding how the internal certification exam process works.
Thank you very much. Let me get my video up, ready to go. Thank you very much, ladies. So we have a couple questions coming in, so thank you for that. And I will say thank you to Brian, who's answered a couple questions already for everybody. So thank you for that. But we do have a question here. For Amy, would the AASHTO Accreditation Program accept certifications if the certification body offered virtual evaluations?
Thank you. I'm sorry about that. I had a tickle in my throat. was great timing. Yes, so as long as the certification program has set something up with you and with other companies that they feel they're adequately able to do their certification through a virtual assessment, we would accept that.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And Trudy, do we recommend can we recommend an external technician certification agency that is the most comprehensive? This laboratory said that their experience has been iffy, that there's some require unrelated information or whatever. So do we recommend ones? Who should they contact for that information?
Well, laboratories can always contact their state quality analyst, but we're not going to say you need to use this program because we feel it's the best, or use this specific program. We'd rather in turn say, okay, I'm looking at this certification program. Does it meet the requirements? And what we will do is tell you if that certification program meets the requirements.
Thank you. Amy, Jimmy wants to know, is it possible for AASHTO to come up with a set of standard questions for each test required in the certification program so all labs can be evaluated on the same baseline?
So Kim, I don't know if you know, but is the question asking if we could create and kind of hand out internal exams for the use?
That's what I'm gathering from the wording of this question.
So that's actually something we did do in the past. And AASHTO Resource as a company decided that if your laboratory is using internal certification program versus an external certification program, you want to make sure you put the time and effort into creating that program yourself and really understanding the standards and the requirements in the standards. So we feel it's really important for you to create those exams yourself. Like I said, your quality analyst will work back and forth with you to get your exams approved. And we have a really comprehensive policy that Kim sent out. So we're not kind of just leaving you out there and say good luck. But we do think it's important for you to create the exam yourself.
Thank you for that. We have a very specific question, Trudy. Perhaps you will know the answer to this. Are Texas Asphalt Pavement Association certifications acceptable?
Yes, they are, but it depends on what quality management system standard you're referencing.
All right. And Alfonso, I would recommend you following up with Trudy directly if you have more questions specifically for that.
Please email me or give me a call and I'll be glad to help you.
Jesse wants to know, Amy, I haven't read the question, so I'm just throwing it out to you, reading it cold read right here. Jesse wants to know, we have several labs within the company. If one of our labs has had an internal exams that we've worked on together and approved with our other labs, can our other labs use those approved exams, or do each lab have to submit the same set of exams for approval? I read that wrong, but I think you got the gist of that.
I got it. Absolutely. We have a lot of laboratories, even if they only have 2 locations, where they have corporate exams. And we much prefer for you to let us know that these exams have already been approved at another location and they're going to be used for corporate use. Because if not, we're going to waste our time reviewing the entire exam before when we've already approved it once. So it's going to make it a lot faster if you just let us know you want to use them on a corporate level and what location they were originally approved at, and we'll update it in our system going forward, and then you can immediately administer them to your staff.
I have a follow-up question just on my own. Would then they need to be approved and charge the $100 fees that they were already? Like, were they charged twice?
They're not.
Okay.
So we only charged per the actual exams we review, which means if they're reviewed for just one laboratory, it'd be the same price as if you have 20 labs in our program and use them at all 20 labs. So the reason for the fee is it takes a lot of time to keep up on reviewing all the exams, doing the work before the meetings, organizing everything after the meetings. And that's why we decided it was important to charge. But we're not going to charge you extra just because they're used at multiple locations, because that's not causing more work for us.
Thank you for that. And I apologize for my inability to read today. So I apologize to everyone watching. I'm trying to see what other next ones. Trudy, why can't AASHTO provide for free or very low cost test templates with minimum questions for common test methods, and labs can add extra questions too? This would eliminate the review for questions. I think we may have already handled that, but do you want to specify or clarify a little bit more on that?
Well, AASHTO Resource and the AASHTO Accreditation Program is not a technician certification program. That's not something we're doing right now. So that's why we're not going to create a template for you to use and fill out. And then we would also hurt a lot of external certification bodies' work, because then maybe a lot of laboratories would start channeling to us. And that's not something we're looking to do right now.
Thank you. And I think Amy did clarify that as well. So thank you. We have more time. So if people want to keep typing in their questions, that would be great. Kyle would like to know, and I will give this to Amy randomly. Are there any other external agencies besides Asphalt Institute that will certify for emulsions?
Off the top of my head, I can't think of any. I knew one of the state DOTs used to, but I don't want to say that in case they don't anymore. But if you send me an email or give me a call after this, I can look it up for you and let you know. But there isn't any other national or regional certification programs that I know of, possibly one state though.
Thank you for that. Trying now, there's more coming in, so I'm trying to keep it all straight. So Trudy, Jimmy says that he has a set of questions. How do I know all of these questions had been assessed and approved? Do you have a record of that for that process?
Yes. So that written exam that you're looking at that's in front of you for your laboratory should have a revision date on there. And that's what we would use to check our files to see if that particular written exam has been approved already in the past. So it's just a matter of sending it to us and letting us know you think this might be approved or maybe not, and we'll check on it. And if it has, then you're set to go and you can use that exam.
Thank you. And I see Michael here says this question is perhaps already been answered, but does AASHTO Resource have a list of approved external certification programs? Amy, do you want to expand on what we do there?
Sure. So at one point, it might be something we still are able to do in the future, but at this point, we don't have a public-facing document or external certification programs that are acceptable. Reason for that is there's a lot of intricacies. Certification programs change all the time. In addition to that, sometimes one certification program doesn't work, but if you take two of their certifications, then you would meet, and it gets pretty confusing. So right now, all of that's kept internally. So if you contact a quality analyst or even an assessor, they have access to that information, and we can let you know if it's going to meet. A long-term goal is maybe we'll have it facing externally eventually, but we can't promise that right now just because there's a lot of things that go into reviewing the certification policies, and we don't want to put any inaccurate information out there.
Thank you for clarifying that. Trudy, do you recommend any certifications for laboratories that are outside the U.S.?
I'm trying to think. I don't believe I have any knowledge of any that I know of specifically, besides state programs. If we're thinking Puerto Rico or Guam, there might be some state programs there. But other than that, I don't know of any international ones offhand at the top of my head.
Brian, do you want to jump in there? I saw.
Yeah, I'll jump in there. Yeah, I'd say, Joel, let us know what you're thinking about. Reach out to either me or Amy or Trudy, and we can take a look at the program that you're using or thinking about using and give you a, we can look at it the same way we look at the ones that we know about in the United States.
Thank you for that clarification. John wants to know, Amy, when are you requiring or looking at external certification providers to have the appropriate ISO certifications?
Right. So at this time, we are not requiring that. There is a document that we're working on updates to an old standard where there would be requirements for minimum requirements that external certification bodies would have to have, and that's not something we even have a plan on requiring anytime soon. It would be, if that standard gets approved, we would want them to kind of use that as a guideline, but it's nothing we're going to be enforcing now or in the near future.
Thank you, Amy.
I'll jump in and add a little bit more to that. There have been some discussions in ASTM E36 about requiring ISO 17024 accreditation for the certification providers. That hasn't been put into the standard in the requirements, but that has been kicked around. There's obviously could be some issues for all the certification providers in the United States, because that is, ISO isn't generally something that they pursue unless they're required to. But if you're interested in getting involved more in that discussion, you might want to join E36. It's a committee in ASTM.
Thank you for that, Brian. Now, Trudy, Ava wants to know if the laboratory supervisors at our lab are not allowed to perform testing, do they need to hold the certifications?
Yes, if they're the supervisor of the technician, they're reviewing those test reports, test records, test results. Yes, they would need to be certified, even if they're not doing testing themselves.
Thank you. Amy, Chantel wants to know if an external agency provides certification with a written exam only, could we supplement that with an internal performance exam without having to approve an internal written exam?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's something that labs do a lot of times. In addition to that, this kind of just reminded me, you can also, if you have a certification program that only offers, D3740, for example, it requires 5 test methods. If you have a certification program that covers 4 test methods, that can be supplemented with an internal written exam or a different certification program. And again, it can be pieced together with internal performance evaluations and external certifications for written exams.
Thank you. And Nathaniel, I think that answers your question too. So that seems to be a common question. I'm trying to see what other ones we have here.
Hey, let me jump in on that Nathaniel question. There was a little distinction to that question because, yeah, he was asking about ICC soils specifically, and that one doesn't actually cover the test methods in the manner that D3740 describes. So even if you were including a performance exam, then ICC soils certification wouldn't be in conformance with the requirements.
That's why you're here, Brian. Thank you. Trudy, Philip wants to know, our lab manager reviews reports. However, he does not supervise technicians. Does he need to be certified in the tests?
The laboratory manager does not. I'm assuming there's still, did you mention there were still laboratory supervisors?
He says he does not supervise technicians. He's just reviews reports.
He's higher up, then he does not need to be certified.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, and I would say, Philip, for that one, we'd really want to take a look at your org chart to say for certain what the answer to that one is, because the terminology used can be all over the place when people ask questions like this, and then we can't really tell unless we see exactly how that lab's organized. So feel free to send that one to Trudy or Amy or your quality analyst if it's not one of them.
Thank you for that clarification. Yeah, a lot of these specific questions can be challenging, so without all of the details. Amy, a Zoom user wants to know, we work with asphalt emulsions. We get recertified through our state agency every 5 years. Is this satisfactory?
It depends. I assume they're looking for D3666 emulsions or E329 emulsions. If that's the case, we would have to take a look at what certification program is offered by their agency. If they don't need it, if they're not seeking D3666 or E329, then as long as they have performance evaluations, that would be acceptable.
All right. And thank you. That's all of our questions that we've had come in so far. There's still a little more time, so I'm going to wait a little bit to see if anybody wants to come in. Has any of these questions sparked something that we forgot to say that we want to kind of throw in there now as we're waiting to see if any more questions come in?
I guess I'll just say we understand that a lot of people are having issues right now finding certification programs because of things being closed because of COVID. So it's important from the very beginning to have conversations with your quality analyst so we can work out a plan with you to get your staff certified, because we're going to be much more lenient and able to help you if you communicate with us instead of waiting until you're suspended to say, hey, I can't find anything, because then it's usually too late. So start conversations early with us.
Yeah, proactive is always the better choice, isn't it? To be proactive as opposed to reactive. All right. Well, I haven't seen any more questions come in. So I guess we can call it a day. So thank you everybody for spending time with us. Here is the contact information for Amy and Trudy. Please reach out to them if you have any further questions. You can also reach out to us and connect to us to resource through Twitter and LinkedIn and our podcast. So there's multiple ways to reach us if you need it. So we encourage you to do that. And if you haven't already, we encourage you to register for our next month's webinar. You can find more details on our events page on our website. And finally, please take a moment when you leave today's session to submit your feedback on today's webinar. We're always looking for continual improvement opportunities, and your feedback on today's session is going to be super valuable. So thank you everybody for attending, and thank you for your time, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
All right, thanks.